Story outline: Echoes of Starlight Part 1. The Crimson Harvester Actors. Zara Voss, human rebel. Kale Thorne Zephyrian overseer. A human mining colony faces brutal harvesting quotas. Under alien rule, Zara, a skilled engineer, sabotages mining equipment while Kale, a conflicted Zephyrian overseer with empathic abilities, begins questioning his people's methods when he senses her pain. Part 2. Whispers in the Void Chair Actors. Marcus Reed, human smuggler. Nyx Solari, exiled Etherian diplomat. A smuggler rescues an alien diplomat fleeing her own people's oppressive regime. Their journey through dangerous space routes becomes a dance of trust as they discover their species share more than they thought possible. Part 3. The Garden of Forgotten Dream Shar Actors. Elena Vasquez, human botanist. Riven Ashkor, Verdanian nature guardian in a secret biodome preserving Earth's extinct flora. A human scientist and an alien guardian work together to protect the last remnants of both their world's natural heritage, finding love among the flowers of a dying past. Part 4. Songs of the Solar Windshire Actors. Dante Cross, human pilot. Srafina, Vale Melodian musician warrior. A human pilot crash lands on a world where music holds mystical power. A warrior musician of the native species saves him, and together they must use harmonized songs to prevent an interdimensional catastrophe. Part 5. The Last Stars Promise Seeker Actors. All previous characters unite. The couples from each part must work together as their rebellion grows into a galactic movement, proving that love can bridge any divide and reshape the destiny of multiple worlds. Part 1. The Crimson Harvest Extraction alarms shrieked across Colony Tertius 7. Like dying metal birds, their piercing cry cutting through the perpetual crimson twilight of the mining world. Zara Voss pressed herself against the corrugated wall of Processing Station Delta, her breath forming small clouds in the thin atmosphere as she waited for the patrol to pass. The neural dampening collar round her neck hummed with familiar malevolence, its cold metal a constant reminder of humanity's subjugation. 3 years had passed since the Zephyrian Empire had swept through human space like a cosmic plague, their advanced technology rendering Earth's defenses as useful as paper shields against plasma fire. The conquest had been swift, methodical, and utterly devastating. Those who survived found themselves scattered across mining colonies, research stations, and labor camps throughout the Outer Rim, their purpose reduced to a single function: resource extraction for their alien masters. Zara's fingers traced the outline of the small device hidden beneath her work coveralls, a frequency disruptor she'd managed to cobble together from salvaged components over the past month. Tonight, she would strike another blow against the quota system that worked her people to death. The Crimson Harvest, as the overseers called it, demanded impossible amounts of rare minerals from the planet's core, and failure to meet targets resulted in reduced rations, extended work shifts, or worse, transfer to the notorious processing centers from which no human ever returned. The patrol's footsteps faded into the distance, their synchronized march echoing off the metal structures that comprised most of the colony. Zara slipped from her hiding place and moved with practiced stealth toward the primary excavation platform. The massive drilling apparatus dominated the colony's center, its crystalline power core pulsing with ethereal blue light that cast dancing shadows across the rust-colored ground. She had studied the machine's schematics for weeks, memorizing every circuit pathway and power coupling. A precisely placed electromagnetic pulse would trigger a cascade failure in the drilling system's neural network, forcing a complete shutdown that would take days to repair. Days during which her people could rest, recover, and perhaps find small moments of hope in their endless struggle. As Zara approached the platform's base, she failed to notice the figure watching her from the observation tower above. Kale Thorne stood motionless at the tower's edge, his tall, angular form silhouetted against the alien constellations that wheeled overhead. His skin bore the characteristic silver-blue hue of his species, marked with the intricate bioluminescent patterns that indicated his caste within Zephyrian society. As a third-tier overseer, he possessed limited empathic abilities, a trait that made him effective at managing human workers, but also cursed him with unwanted sensitivity to their suffering. Kells, Elongated fingers gripped the tower's railing as he observed the small human below. Her movements were precise, purposeful, and completely unauthorized. By all protocols, he should have alerted security immediately. The penalty for sabotage was severe, often involving neural reconditioning that left the subject a hollow shell of their former self. Yet something stayed his hand, a flutter of emotion that seemed to emanate from the woman below. A complex mixture of determination, fear, and desperate hope that resonated through his empathic senses like a half-remembered song. The sensation was not entirely unfamiliar. Over the months of his assignment to Colony Tertius 7, Cale had become increasingly aware of the emotional undercurrents that flowed through the human population. Unlike the sterile mental landscape of his own people, human consciousness burned with fierce intensity, their feelings raw and unfiltered in ways both fascinating and disturbing. The Empire's scientists claimed that humans were little more than clever animals, their emotional volatility proof of their primitive nature. But Kel's direct experience suggested something far more complex. Below, Zara reached the drilling platform and began her work. The frequency disruptor's installation required careful precision to hasty, and the device would be detected by the platform's security systems to slow, and the rotating patrol schedule would bring guards back to this sector before she could complete her task. Her hands moved with the steady confidence of someone who had spent years working with complex machinery, each connection made with the expertise of a trained engineer. Cale found himself leaning forward, his empathic senses fully engaged as he monitored the human's emotional state. He could feel her heart rate elevating as she worked, taste the metallic tang of her fear on his enhanced perception. But beneath the surface anxiety lay something else, a core of absolute resolve that burned like a small star in the darkness of her circumstances. It was beautiful in its own way, this human capacity for defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 17 different species during its expansion across the galaxy, and Cale had served as an overseer for 3 of them. The crystalline hive minds of Proxima had simply ceased communication when defeated, retreating into a collective sulk that lasted for decades. The aquatic philosophers of Kepler's Edge had accepted subjugation with resigned fatalism, viewing their conquest as merely another chapter in the cosmic cycle. But humans fought with a persistence that bordered on the irrational, their rebellion taking forms both grand and subtle. A soft chime from his communication device interrupted Kel's observations. "Overseer Thorne," came the synthesized voice of the colony's AI administrator. "Your presence is requested in central processing. Priority 7. Priority 7 meant routine administrative duties, quota assessments, disciplinary reviews, resource allocation approvals, the kind of bureaucratic tedium that consumed most of his working hours and left him longing for something more meaningful. Cale glanced once more at the human woman below, now making final adjustments to her sabotage device, then activated his response beacon, acknowledged en route. As he turned to leave the observation tower, Cale made a decision that would alter the trajectory of both their lives. Instead of reporting the sabotage attempt, he would simply overlook it. One small act of willful blindness in the vast machinery of imperial oppression. The drilling platform would fail, the quota would go unmet, and the humans would gain a brief respite from their endless toil. Such a minor deviation from protocol would go unnoticed. Among the colony's regular operational difficulties, Zara completed her work and slipped away into the shadows. Just as the first patrol of the night cycle rounded the corner, the frequency disruptor was now integrated into the platform's neural network, set to activate during the next day's primary excavation sequence. She allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction as she made her way back toward the worker barracks, another small victory in humanity's long struggle for dignity and survival. Neither Zara nor Cale could have imagined that this moment would mark the beginning of something extraordinary in a universe where love was seen as weakness and compassion as inefficiency. Two beings from different worlds had just taken the first steps toward discovering that the greatest rebellion might not be fought with weapons or sabotage, but with the simple act of choosing to see the other as something more than enemy or subject. The crimson sky above Colony Tertius 7 continued its eternal dance, alien stars bearing witness to the quiet revolution that had begun in the shadows of a mining platform, sparked by one woman's determination and one man's unexpected mercy. In the distance, the Zephyrian fleet's patrol vessels traced lazy arcs through the darkness, their crews unaware that the seeds of change had already been planted in the rust-colored soil of their most secure facility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new quotas to meet, and new opportunities for both defiance and understanding. But Part 2, whispers in the void. The cargo hold of the wandering star reeked of desperation and recycled air. Marcus Reed pressed his back against the cold metal bulkhead, listening to the rhythmic hum of the ship's aging life support systems as he waited for his contact to arrive. The independent freighter had seen better decades. Its hull bore the scars of countless asteroid impacts, and its engines wheezed like an old man climbing stairs, but it was home. And more importantly, it was invisible to most Imperial scanning. Raised out, Marcus had built his reputation over the past 2 years as someone who could move anything, anywhere, no questions asked. Refugees, contraband, information, weapons if it needed to disappear from one place and reappear in another. He was the man to call. The Zephyrian Empire's iron grip on interstellar commerce had created a thriving black market, and Marcus had found his niche, ferrying hope through the darkness between stars. Tonight's job should have been routine. Pick up a package from Vale Station, deliver it to the outer colonies, collect payment, and move on. The client had been vague about the cargo's nature, but that wasn't unusual in his line of work. What was unusual was the price: enough credits to buy a new ship, or at least enough to make the wandering star spaceworthy for another few years. The airlock cycled with a soft hiss, and Marcus straightened as footsteps echoed in the corridor beyond. He'd been expecting a crate, maybe a data core, possibly even a stasis pod containing someone fleeing Imperial justice. He hadn't been expecting her. The woman who entered his cargo hold moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to low gravity, her tall, slender frame wrapped in a hooded cloak that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. When she lowered the hood, Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. Her skin held the pale luminescence of moonlight on water, and her eyes were the deep violet of nebulae seen from a distance. Delicate patterns of silver traced along her temples and throat, not tattoos, but natural markings that pulsed gently with her heartbeat. "You are the smuggler Reed?" she asked, her voice carrying a musical quality that made his name sound like poetry. "That's me," Marcus replied, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Though I prefer independent transport specialist, and you're not exactly what I was expecting." She stepped fully into the cargo hold, and Marcus caught a glimpse of elaborate robes beneath her cloak, deep blues and purples that seemed to shift and flow like liquid starlight. "I am Nyx Solari," she said simply. "I am what you were hired to transport." Marcus had dealt with enough alien species during his years of smuggling to recognize the signs. The musical voice, the luminescent skin, the way she seemed to glide. Rather than walk, she was Etherian, one of the Empire's most valued client species. The Etherians served as diplomats and cultural interpreters throughout Imperial space, their natural empathic abilities making them ideal mediators in interspecies disputes. They were also notoriously loyal to the Empire, which made Nyx's presence in his cargo hold deeply puzzling. "Let me guess," Marcus said, activating the hold's privacy shields. "You're not here with official sanction." NYX's luminescent markings dimmed slightly, a sign of distress among her people. "I am no longer welcome in Imperial space. My diplomatic immunity has been revoked." "What did you do? Steal something? Kill someone? Fall in love with the wrong person?" "I told the truth," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus waited for her to elaborate, but she remained silent, her violet eyes studying the scarred walls of his cargo hold as if they contained the secrets of the universe. He'd learned long ago not to push clients for information they weren't ready to share. Everyone running from the Empire had their reasons, and those reasons were usually painful. "All right," he said finally, truth-telling. "I can see how that might be a problem in your line of work. Where are we headed?" "Sanctuary Station," Nyx replied. In the Broken Worlds, Marcus whistled low. Sanctuary Station was a notorious haven for refugees, criminals, and anyone else who needed to disappear from Imperial notice. It was also located in one of the most dangerous regions of space, surrounded by unstable wormholes and gravitational anomalies that made navigation treacherous. The journey would take them through 3 different Imperial patrol zones and past at least 2 major military installations. "That's going to cost extra," he said. "I have already transferred the agreed-upon sum to your account," Nix replied, "plus a substantial bonus for discretion." Marcus checked his credit balance on his wrist display and nearly choked. The amount was more than he'd made in the past year combined. "This is either very generous or very dangerous." "Both," Nix admitted. The next several hours passed in tense silence as Marcus piloted the Wandering Star away from Vale Station and into the shipping lanes that would take them toward the Outer Rim. Nix had claimed a corner of the cargo hold, sitting in what appeared to be a meditative posture, her markings pulsing in slow, rhythmic patterns. Marcus found himself stealing glances at her through the cockpit's rear viewport, fascinated by the play of light across her alien features. It wasn't until they were well clear of the inner system that she spoke again. "You are wondering why an Etherian diplomat would flee from the Empire," she said, appearing suddenly in the cockpit doorway. "The thought had crossed my mind," Marcus admitted, not looking away from his navigation display. "Your people have a pretty good deal with the Empire. Respected positions, comfortable lives, plenty of influence." "Yes," Nix said, settling into the co-pilot's chair. "We are the Empire's pet psychics, trained to read the emotions of conquered species and help our masters understand how to control them more effectively." There was a bitter edge to her voice that Marcus hadn't heard before. "I take it you had a problem with that arrangement." "I had a problem with what I was asked to do," she replied. 3 months ago, I was assigned to evaluate a group of human refugees who had requested asylum, families with children, mostly people who had fled the destruction of their home world and were seeking sanctuary in Imperial space. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He'd heard stories about what happened to human refugees who trusted Imperial promises of protection, and my report was supposed to assess their psychological stability, their potential for integration into Imperial society. Instead, I discovered that they were being used as test subjects for new forms of neural conditioning. The children, she paused, her markings flaring brightly with distress. The children were being prepared for something called the Youth Integration Protocol. Never heard of it. Forced adoption by Imperial families, Nix explained, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. The idea is to raise human children from a young age to be completely loyal to the Empire, to serve as intermediaries between their species and their conquerors. The younger ones have their memories selectively edited. The older ones undergo more aggressive treatments. Marcus's hands tightened on the ship's controls. He'd spent enough time around the Empire's victims to know that aggressive treatment was a euphemism for torture. "So you filed a report recommending against the program?" "I did more than that," Nix said. "I helped them escape." The admission hung in the air between them like a live wire. Marcus glanced at his passenger, seeing her in an entirely new light. Etherians were known for their diplomatic neutrality, their ability to maintain emotional distance even in the most traumatic situations. For one of them to actively work against the Empire, to risk everything for the sake of strangers, was almost unprecedented. "How many?" he asked. 47, mostly children, but some adults as well. I used my diplomatic credentials to transfer them to what their handlers believed was a more secure facility. Instead, I routed them through a series of safe houses operated by the Underground. The Underground, a network of resistance cells operating throughout Imperial space. They specialize in helping refugees and political dissidents disappear. Marcus had heard rumors of such an organization, but he'd always assumed they were just wishful thinking on the part of the Empire's enemies. "And now you're on their list too." "I am what your people would call burned," Nix confirmed. "My neural patterns have been flagged in all Imperial databases. If I'm captured, I'll be subjected to complete memory reconstruction. They'll erase everything I am and rebuild me as a loyal servant of the state." They flew in silence for a while. the wandering star cutting through the void between systems like a minnow. Swimming through an ocean of stars, Marcus found himself thinking about the children Nyx had saved, wondering where they were now, whether they were safe. He'd never considered himself particularly heroic. He was just a guy, trying to make a living in a hostile universe, but something about her story stirred emotions he'd been keeping carefully buried. "Why did you do it?" he asked finally. Nyx was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible above the ship's background hum. "Because I felt their pain," she said. "Our empathic abilities are supposed to be used as tools of analysis, clinical observation. We're trained to experience other beings' emotions without being affected by them. But those children, their fear, their confusion, their desperate hope that someone would help them. I couldn't maintain my distance." "Sounds like you're more human than you thought." "Perhaps," Nyx said, and F. Part 3. The Garden of Forgotten Dreams. The biodome nestled in the shadow of Mount Serenity, like a giant soap bubble made of crystalline panels and hope. Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the entry scanner, holding her breath as the security system processed her credentials. After 18 months of careful planning and delicate negotiations, she was finally here. Sanctuary 7, the most closely guarded secret in the Outer Ring territories. The airlock cycled with a soft whisper, and Elena stepped into what had once been impossible, a perfect recreation of Earth's lost biosphere. The humid air carried scents that made her heart ache with recognition: jasmine, wet earth, the green smell of growing things that had been extinct for 3 years. Above her head, a canopy of earth trees stretched toward an artificial sky that perfectly mimicked the blue of home. "You must be the new botanist," a voice said behind her. Speaking in accented standard, Elena turned to find herself facing one of the most beautiful beings she had ever seen. Tall and slender, with skin the color of rich earth and hair that seemed to be composed of living vines. He moved with the fluid grace of someone born to forest paths. His eyes were the deep green of old-growth woods, and when he smiled, she caught a glimpse of teeth that gleamed like polished jade. "Elena Vasquez," she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "And you're Verdanian, aren't you?" "Riven Ashkor," he replied, taking her hand with surprising gentleness. His skin was warm and textured like bark, and she felt a strange tingling where they touched. "Guardian of the Eastern Quadrant. And yes, though I suspect you already knew that from the briefing materials." Elena nodded, trying not to stare at the way his hair moved in the artificial breeze, individual strands swaying like branches in a gentle wind. The Verdanians were one of the few species that had managed to maintain their independence from the Zephyrian Empire, largely because their home world was considered too primitive and resource-poor to be worth conquering. What the Empire didn't realize was that Verdanians possessed an almost mystical connection to plant life, able to communicate with and nurture growing things in ways that bordered on the miraculous. "The briefing materials didn't do this place justice," Elena said, gazing up at the canopy above them. "How many species are you preserving here?" "Approximately 12,000 from your world," Riven replied, beginning to walk along a path that seemed to have grown naturally from the forest floor. "Everything from the smallest flowering herbs to some of the last great trees that once covered your northern continents. We also maintain specimens from 47 other worlds that have been disrupted by imperial expansion." Disrupted was a diplomatic way of saying strip-mined into lifelessness, but Elena appreciated his tact. She followed him deeper into the forest, marveling at the perfect recreation of an ecosystem that existed now only in memory. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of running water and the calls of birds that had been silenced forever on Earth. "The Resistance made quite an effort to recruit you," Riven continued, his bare feet making no sound on the moss-covered path. "A xenobotanist with 3 degrees and 5 years experience working with non-terrestrial plant species. Your expertise in cross-species genetic compatibility is particularly valuable." "I was surprised they found me at all," Elena admitted. "I've been keeping a low profile since Earth fell." "The underground has many eyes and ears," Riven said. "When they learned of our project here, your name was at the top of their list of recommended candidates." The path opened into a circular clearing where a stone fountain sent crystalline water dancing through the air. Around the fountain's edge, dozens of earth flowers bloomed in impossible profusion: roses, orchids, lilies, and species Elena had thought were lost forever. She knelt beside a patch of forget-me-nots, their tiny blue faces turned toward the artificial sun. "These are perfect," she whispered, tears gathering in her eyes, "every detail, every genetic marker. How did you manage to preserve them so completely?" "We had help," Riven said, settling cross-legged beside her on the moss. 3 years ago, just before Earth's final evacuation, a human ship arrived in Verdanian space. The crew claimed to be carrying the most comprehensive genetic library ever. Assembled seeds, samples, even live specimens in stasis. They asked for asylum, not for themselves, but for their cargo. Elena looked up from the flowers, her breath catching. "The Darwin's dream. We thought it was destroyed in the evacuation. Captain Torres and her crew died getting here," Riven said softly. "Their ship was badly damaged, life support failing. They had perhaps an hour of air left when they arrived, but they refused medical attention until every single specimen had been safely transferred to our preservation facilities." The weight of that sacrifice settled over Elena like a shroud. She had known Maria Torres, had worked with her on several research expeditions before the war. The thought of her friend's final hours, spent ensuring the survival of Earth's botanical heritage rather than her own life, was almost too much to bear. They saved everything they could. Riven continued, his hand coming to rest gently on Elena's shoulder. "But preservation is only the first step. These plants need more than just survival. They need to evolve, to adapt, to find new homes where they can flourish. That's why we need you." Over the following days, Riven showed Elena the full scope of Sanctuary 7's operations. The biodome was larger than she had imagined, containing multiple distinct ecosystems that recreated everything from tropical rainforests to Arctic tundra. Each section was maintained by Verdanian guardians who had dedicated their lives to understanding and preserving the botanical treasures of lost worlds. Elena threw herself into the work with an enthusiasm that surprised even her. After 3 years of grief and displacement, of watching the universe grow smaller and darker with each imperial conquest, she had found something worth fighting for. The laboratory facilities were beyond anything she had worked with on Earth, incorporating both human scientific methodology and Verdanian biomysticism in ways that produced remarkable results. "The key is communication," Riven explained as they worked together in the genetic synthesis lab. "Your people approach plant life as something to be studied and cataloged. Mine see it as part of a living network, a conversation that spans worlds and species." Elena watched in fascination as he placed his hands on either side of a small earth oak seedling, his eyes closing in concentration. The vines that made up his hair began to glow with a soft green light, and she could swear she heard something like music in the air around them. The seedling responded visibly, its leaves unfurling and reaching toward Riven's touch. "What are you doing to it?" she asked. "I'm listening," he replied, his eyes still closed. "Every plant carries the memory of its species, the accumulated wisdom of countless generations. This little one remembers vast forests, the feel of real sunlight, the company of its kin, but it also carries the potential for change, for adaptation to new environments. And you can hear all that, feel it, more than hear it. The Verdanian nervous system is partially plant-based. We're closer to the green world than most species. Realize," he opened his eyes and smiled at her, "but you have your own gifts. Your scientific training allows you to understand the mechanisms behind what I can only sense intuitively." Their collaboration proved remarkably fruitful. Elena's knowledge of genetic engineering, combined with Riven's intuitive understanding of plant consciousness, began producing hybrid specimens that neither could have created alone. They developed new strains of earth crops that could thrive in the harsh conditions of refugee colonies, flowering plants that could survive in the artificial environments of generation ships, and trees that could begin the slow process of terraforming barren worlds. But it was during the long hours they spent working side by side that Elena began to notice something else growing, a connection between them that went deeper than professional collaboration. Riven's presence was soothing in ways she couldn't quite explain. His voice like wind through leaves, his touch gentle and grounding. When he smiled, which he did often, she felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight with grief for too long. "You're homesick," he observed one evening as they sat together in the meadow section, surrounded by earth wildflowers that bloomed under alien constellations. "Every day," Elena admitted. "Sometimes I wake up and for just a moment, I forget that Earth is gone. I think I'm going to smell coffee brewing in the kitchen, or hear my neighbor's dog barking in the yard. Then reality sets in." "I understand," Riven said. "When I was young, my Grove family was killed in a mining accident, one of the few times we allowed off-world industrial operations on Verdania. I spent years carrying the weight of that loss, feeling like part of myself had been cut away." "How did you get through it?" "By learning that loss and growth can happen simultaneously," he replied, his hand finding hers in the soft grass. "The grove that raised me is gone, but the wisdom they shared lives on in everything I do. Your Earth may be lost, but its beauty continues here, in this garden, in the seeds we're sending to new worlds." Elena looked around at the impossible garden surrounding them, at the living proof that beauty could survive even the worst devastation. "It's not the same, though. These are copies, shadows of W." Part 4, Songs of the Solar Wind. Distress beacon cut through the cosmic static. Like a scream in the darkness, its urgent pulse dragging Dante Cross from the edge of sleep. He jackknifed upright in his pilot's chair, fingers dancing across the stellar nomad's control panels as he tried to pinpoint the signal's origin. The readings made him frown. The beacon was coming from Resonance, a world officially listed as uninhabited and off-limits to commercial traffic. Dante had been ferrying medical supplies to the outer colonies for 3 months, part of a relief effort organized by the Underground Resistance Network. It was dangerous work, requiring him to slip past Imperial patrols and navigate through uncharted systems. But it paid well and felt like the first meaningful thing he'd done since losing his family. In the fall of Earth, the stellar nomad was fast, reliable, and equipped with enough countermeasures to keep him ahead of most pursuit craft. But this distress signal was pulling him off course, toward a world that every star chart marked with warnings about atmospheric anomalies and navigation hazards. Dante had always assumed those warnings were Imperial code for secret military installation. But something about the beacon's frequency pattern made him reconsider. It wasn't using standard emergency protocols. Instead, it seemed to pulse in complex rhythms that reminded him of music. "Probably some poor bastard who got lost like me," he muttered, adjusting his course toward Resonance. The decision went against every survival instinct he'd developed during his years as a smuggler. But he'd never been able to ignore a cry for help. The approach to Resonance proved everything the charts had warned about and more. The planet's atmosphere shimmered with aurora-like effects that played havoc with his instruments, and the stellar nomad bucked and twisted as it encountered pockets of charged particles that shouldn't have existed. Worse, his navigation systems kept picking up phantom readings, ghost ships that appeared on sensors for a few seconds before vanishing, energy signatures that pulsed in patterns too regular to be natural phenomena. It wasn't until he broke through the cloud layer that Dante understood what he was seeing. The planet's surface was covered in vast crystalline structures that rose from the Earth, like frozen music, their faceted surfaces catching and reflecting the light of the system's binary stars. As the stellar nomad descended, these crystal formations began to emit sounds not audible through the vacuum of space, but transmitted directly through his ship's hull in harmonious frequencies that made his bones vibrate. The distress beacon led him to a cleared area near one of the larger crystal clusters, where the twisted wreckage of a small exploration craft lay scattered across the iridescent ground. Dante set his ship down carefully, noting that the crystalline formations seemed to pulse more brightly as his engines powered down, as if responding to the vibrations of his landing. He checked his environment suit twice before cycling through the airlock. The atmospheric readings showed breathable air, but the energy signatures were off the charts. Whatever was generating the planet's aurora effects was also saturating the environment with exotic particles. As his boots touched the crystal-flecked Soil, Dante felt a strange sensation, as if the ground itself was humming beneath his feet. The wreckage was recent, perhaps only a few days old. Dante picked his way through the debris, looking for survivors, or at least some indication of what had brought the ship down. The craft's design was unfamiliar, sleek and organic-looking, with curves that reminded him more of a seashell than traditional aerospace engineering. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing strangely in the charged atmosphere. "Is anyone out there? I got your distress signal." The response came not as words, but as music, a hauntingly beautiful melody that seemed to emanate from the crystal formations themselves. The notes rose and fell in complex harmonies that spoke of loneliness, hope, and desperate need for contact. Dante found himself turning toward the largest of the nearby structures, following the song as if it were a physical thread pulling him forward. She was waiting for him in a natural amphitheater formed by converging crystal spires, her slender form silhouetted against the prismatic light that danced across the formation's surfaces. As he approached, Dante realized he was looking at his first Melodian, a member of the reclusive species that had withdrawn from galactic civilization decades ago, retreating to worlds where their unique relationship with sound and vibration could flourish undisturbed. Serafina Vale stood perhaps 6 feet tall, her skin bearing a faint opalescent sheen that shifted through subtle hues of blue and silver. Her hair fell to her shoulders in waves that seemed to move independently of any breeze, and her eyes were the deep purple of twilight skies. What captured Dante's attention most, however, were the intricate patterns that covered her arms and throat, not tattoos, but natural resonance channels that glowed softly as they conducted harmonic frequencies through her body. "You came," she said, her voice carrying an otherworldly quality that made his heart skip. Even spoken words from a Melodian contained subtle musical undertones that human ears could barely perceive, but somehow still affected the listener's emotions. "Your distress signal," Dante managed, suddenly feeling clumsy and crude in the presence of such ethereal beauty. "I picked it up on my ship's communications ray." "Not a signal," Serafina corrected, stepping closer. "A song. I was singing to the void, hoping someone would hear the loneliness in my voice." "Your ship crashed." "Shot down," she replied, her resonance channels flaring briefly with anger. "Imperial raiders. They've been hunting my people across the sector, capturing us for our abilities." Dante felt a familiar surge of rage at the mention of Imperial raiders. These weren't official military forces but freelance slavers who operated with the Empire's tacit approval, capturing exotic species for sale to private collectors or research facilities. He'd encountered their work before, entire refugee convoys that simply vanished in transit, their cargoes of desperate families sold to the highest bidders. "How many of you were there?" he asked. "I was alone," Serafina said, her song voice carrying notes of profound isolation. Was a harmonic seeker. My role was to explore new worlds, to listen for the deep songs that connect all living things. And you ended up here. Resonance calls to us," she explained, gesturing toward the crystal formations that surrounded them. "This world sings with voices we haven't heard for millennia, the echoes of species that learn to encode their consciousness into crystalline matrices before their physical forms perished." As if responding to her words, the crystals began to emit a low, thrumming harmony that Dante could feel in his chest cavity. The sound was both alien and strangely comforting, like a lullaby sung in a language he'd never learned, but somehow understood. "They're trying to communicate," Serafina continued, placing her hand against the nearest formation, "but their songs are degrading, losing coherence with each passing century. Without intervention, these voices will fade into silence forever." "What kind of intervention?" "A harmonic amplification," she said, turning to face him directly. "My people developed the technique during the early days of our civilization. By linking our bioacoustic systems with compatible resonance sources, we can stabilize degrading harmonic patterns and strengthen failing song structures." Dante tried to follow her explanation, but the technical concepts were beyond his experience. "Sounds complicated. It requires two voices in perfect synchronization," Serafina said. "One to provide stability, one to provide power. I have the knowledge and the natural abilities, But she gestured toward her damaged ship. My harmonic amplifiers were destroyed in the crash. Without technological enhancement, I cannot generate sufficient resonance to complete the amplification alone. What does this have to do with me? I can't sing worth a damn. Serafina's laugh was like silver bells chimming in harmony. Human vocal cords are remarkably versatile, capable of producing a wider range of frequencies than most species realize. More importantly, your emotional resonance is incredibly strong. I can hear it in your voice. See it in your bioelectric field. You carry deep pain, but also hope, love lost, but not abandoned. The accuracy of her assessment was unsettling. Dante had spent 3 years trying to bury the memories of his wife and daughter, killed in the bombardment of New Geneva during Earth's final days. He'd thrown himself into smuggling runs and relief missions, anything to keep moving and avoid dwelling on what he'd lost. I don't see how that helps with your crystal situation, he said. Pain and hope create the most powerful harmonic resonances, Serafina explained. When properly channeled, they can bridge the gap between different forms of consciousness. Your emotional spectrum, combined with my technical abilities, might be enough to complete the amplification. And if it doesn't work, then these voices are lost forever, and I remain stranded on a world that will drain my life force within days. Dante looked around at the crystal formations, watching the play of light across their faceted surfaces. He thought about the voices Serafina claimed were trapped within the final remnants of an entire civilization, slowly fading into cosmic background noise. The idea of letting them die seemed obscene, like watching a library burn while having the power to save it. What do I need to do? The process was unlike a. Part 5. The last star's promiseth message arrived through channels so secretive that even the underground's most paranoid operatives took 3 days to verify its authenticity. When the quantum encrypted transmission finally reached its intended recipients, scattered across the galaxy in hidden safe houses and forgotten outposts, it carried just for words that would change everything. The stars are calling. Zara Voss read the message while huddled in the maintenance tunnels beneath Colony Tertius 7. Her latest act of sabotage having forced the entire mining operation into temporary shutdown. Beside her, Cale Thorne monitored the tunnel entrance. His empathic abilities stretched to their limits as he tracked the emotional signatures of the search teams combing the facility above them. It's starting, Zara whispered, her fingers tracing the coordinates embedded in the message's metadata. The convergence Nix wrote about. Kel's bioluminescent patterns flickered with concern. Are you certain we should answer this call? The location is deep in contested space. 3 different Imperial fleets patrol that sector. That's exactly why we have to go, Zara replied, beginning to pack her few possessions into a salvaged equipment bag. If the underground is willing to risk everything on a single gathering, then something unprecedented is happening. The coordinates led to a system that didn't appear on any official star charts, a cluster of dead worlds orbiting a dying star that Imperial surveys had dismissed as strategically worthless. What those surveys had missed was Sanctuary Station, a massive space habitat constructed from the hollowed-out remains of a shattered moon. For 5 years, it had served as the underground's most secure meeting point, its location known only to the highest levels of the Resistance network. The wandering star was one of dozens of ships that converged on the hidden station over the course of several days, each vessel arriving through carefully staggered routes to avoid detection. Marcus Reed guided his battered freighter through the station's docking procedures with the practiced ease of someone who had made this journey many times before, while Nix Solari monitored the communications channels for any sign of Imperial pursuit. I count 37 vessels so far, Nix reported, her empathic abilities allowing her to sense the emotional resonance of the gathering crowd, even through the station's shielding. Fear, hope, determination, and something else, something I haven't felt since the early days of Imperial expansion. What? Marcus asked, securing the docking clamps. Unity, she replied, her luminescent markings pulsing with wonder. These people aren't just refugees or rebels anymore. They're becoming something new. The main assembly hall of Sanctuary Station had been designed to accommodate multiple species, with adjustable gravity fields and atmospheric controls that could support a wide variety of biological requirements. As representatives from across the galaxy filed into the chamber, the diversity was staggering: humans in their patched clothing and worn expressions, Etherians with their shimmering robes and musical voices, Verdanians whose living hair rustled with nervous energy, Melodians whose very presence filled the air with subtle harmonies. Elena Vasquez and Ryvan Ashkor entered together, their intertwined hands drawing curious glances from other attendees. The months they had spent developing hybrid plant species had changed them both. Elena's scientific precision had been tempered by Verdanian intuition, while Ryvan's mystical understanding had been grounded by human methodology. They represented something that Imperial doctrine claimed was impossible: successful integration between species, cooperation that made both stronger than they could be alone. "The genetic diversity here is remarkable," Elena murmured, studying the assembled crowd. "With a botanicide for adaptation and survival. Look at how different groups have modified their appearance, their behavior patterns. Evolution in real time, natural selection under pressure," Ryvan agreed, his forest green eyes tracking the complex social dynamics unfolding around them. "Those who could adapt, survived. Those who couldn't." He left the sentence unfinished, but Elena understood. The galaxy was littered with the remains of species that had been unable to adjust to Imperial rule. Dante Cross and Serafina Vale had arrived aboard the Stellar Nomad, their ship's hold filled with crystalline storage matrices containing the preserved songs of a dozen worlds. Their journey to Sanctuary Station had taken them through some of the most dangerous regions of space, but they had not traveled alone. The harmonic resonance they had learned to create together had attracted other Melodians, refugees who had been scattered by Imperial persecution, but drawn back together by the promise of unified song. "The acoustic properties of this chamber are extraordinary," Serafina observed, her resonance channels glowing as she analyzed the station's harmonic structure. "It's been designed to amplify and synchronize multiple vocal frequencies. Someone planned for this gathering to become something more than just a meeting, a concert," Dante suggested, only half joking. "A revolution," Serafina corrected, her song voice carrying notes of anticipation and determination. The assembly was called to order not by speeches or formal presentations, but by the simple act of an elderly human woman walking to the center of the chamber. Her name was Catherine Reyes, and she had been organizing resistance cells since the first days of Imperial occupation. Her hair was silver, her face lined with years of struggle, but her voice carried the authority of someone who had never compromised her principles. "We gather here today not as refugees or rebels," she began, her words echoing clearly through the chamber's enhanced acoustics. "We gather as the seed of something new, a civilization that chooses cooperation over conquest, diversity over uniformity, hope over fear." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, but Catherine raised her hand for silence. "The Empire believes that differences make us weak, that unity can only be achieved through domination. Today, we prove them wrong." From different sections of the chamber, individuals began to stand. Zara Voss, her mining colony coveralls bearing the stains of industrial lubricants and her own blood. Marcus Reed, his smuggler's coat telling the story of 100 narrow escapes through its patches and repairs. Elena Vasquez, her botanist's tools gleaming at her belt like instruments of creation rather than destruction. Dante Cross, his pilots, insignia modified with symbols from a dozen different worlds. "Each of you represents a choice," Catherine continued. "The choice to see beyond the boundaries of species, of homeworlds, of the arbitrary divisions that the Empire uses to keep us separated. You have chosen love over fear, cooperation over competition. You have proven that our differences are our strength." Cale Thorne stood slowly, his Zephyrian heritage making him conspicuous among the mostly non-Imperial attendees. Several heads turned in his direction, expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. But when Zara moved to stand beside him, taking his hand in a gesture of public solidarity, the mood shifted to something approaching acceptance. "The Empire taught us that Zephyrians were incapable of empathy," Catherine said, acknowledging Kel's presence with a nod. "Yet here stands one who chose compassion over duty, who risked everything to protect those he was supposed to oppress. If a Zephyrian can choose love over loyalty to the Empire, Then perhaps there is hope for unity even among our former enemies. NYX Solari rose gracefully, her Etherean robes catching the chamber's lighting and reflecting it in subtle patterns. The diplomatic corps believed that emotions were weaknesses to be exploited, she said, her musical voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Instead, I learned that emotions are bridges, connections that allow us to understand and care. For those who are different from ourselves, one by one, others began to stand and speak. Riven Ashkor talked about the gardens they were creating, spaces where the biological heritage of destroyed worlds could take root and flourish in new soil. Serafina Vale sang briefly of the crystalline voices they had saved, proof that consciousness could endure even beyond physical death. Each testimony built upon the last, creating a symphony of shared experience and common purpose. The Empire controls through isolation, Catherine said as the testimonies concluded. They separate us into manageable categories: human, alien, citizen, subject, loyal, rebellious. But categories are just walls, and walls can be torn down. She gestured to a massive holographic display that materialized above the chamber, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red zones indicated Imperial strongholds, while scattered blue dots marked known resistance cells and refugee populations. For too long, we have fought defensively, reacting to Imperial expansion rather than taking the initiative, Catherine continued. Today, that changes. Today, we stop running and start building. The plan that unfolded over the next several hours was audacious in its scope and beautiful in its simplicity. Rather than attempting to defeat the Empire through military force and impossibility given their technological advantages, the Resistance would focus on creating something better. Networks of worlds where different species could live and work together, demonstrating that cooperation was not just possible but superior to Imperial methods. We call it the Synthesis Project, Catherine explained, highlighting a series of potential worlds on the galactic map, planets where humans can work alongside Verdun,